Hi, everybody. My name is Yodit Mesvin Johnson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the president and CEO here at New. We work alongside mission-driven people, organizations, and communities to realize our shared visions of a just and thriving society. In the upcoming year, we're going to be lifting up the hood a little bit on our work, sharing our practices, our processes, and approaches to our vision of empowered leaders and flourishing organizations and vibrant communities. Here at New, we've invested and continue to invest a lot of time and energy in processes and approaches in our work that center equity, justice, inclusion, and that benefit the populations we center in our work. As a 501c3 nonprofit, we have a mission for public good, and we do have fiscal and fiduciary responsibilities that we have to fill in order to stay legally and ethically compliant. But beyond compliance, we see ourselves as stewards of our resources, and we feel a deep sense of accountability to our clients and donors to be good stewards of those resources that they entrust with us. And that accountability includes our team too, since they're such a vital part of achieving our mission and advancing our vision. So today we're going to lift up the hood a little bit on one of our processes, a participatory budgeting process, and I'm excited. I'm joined by good friends and colleagues, Carrie Hammerman, our Chief Strategy and Programs Officer, and Linda Tam, our Chief Finance and Operations Officer. Welcome, y'all.
Thanks, Andy.
I'm gonna begin with some questions, including Carrie, Linda, why did we decide on a participatory goal and budget development process?
I think something that I really love about New is centering our values in the way that we move through everything, and the budget being the one big thing that I am stewarding and leading as the Chief Finance and Operations Officer felt like a big one. And so being able to really come back to our values, so investing in our people as a core one, knowing that the wisdom of the organization lies in the people who are doing the work and not just leadership. And so really wanting to bring voices in and centering the people who know the information intimately. Also sharing and seeding power. It strengthens our organization and our team by building trust and accountability through transparency, shared decision-making, and understanding of the whole. And we believe that better decisions are made if people are brought into the process from the start. So people understand what is happening in the organization, will understand how each of them plays a role, because our team is what moves our mission forward.
Yes, they are. Carrie, anything to add on the process itself, and then how does it work?
Yeah, I can walk you.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you how it's working in this year. And it's been an evolution over time. But for a number of years, we have engaged in an annual community survey. So we really believe in centering our work in the perspectives and input of the people who are most impacted by the work. So we ask them, hey, how did things go? What works for you? What's the impact of our work? And we use that insight as a grounding piece for us to think about what do we want to do going forward. Mm-hmm. So we bring back the data from that community survey and we meet with each of our teams. So not just the leadership of those teams, but the entire teams this year. We met with them and we have what we call the start, stop, continue meetings. And we use it as a way to really think about what do we want to start? What do we want to engage in that is new, like thinking about what gaps or opportunities are available for us to attend to, what excites us, what's important to pursue. And we ask folks, hey, what do we want to stop doing? Maybe based on what we heard from the folks in that community survey or based on what you observed, or the budget also informs that as well. It's a resource like what costs us a lot more money to do, but we just couldn't support doing that going forward. It's not leading to the impact, doesn't leverage our strengths. There might be others in the sector we realize are able to do that even better. So we use that as our stop, and then continue is using our knowledge of what we've heard people liked or they're invested in, or we understand that's working well. And the budget says, yeah, that makes sense to continue to do that based on our numbers from the previous year. We then can think about as a team in those start, stop, continue meetings about what we want to do going forward. So we're moving beyond intuition-based decision-making and data-informed processes. So we review it as a team. We provide the materials in advance for everyone to look at. They come prepared and we talk. And we originally set up like 1 hour and 15 minutes for each of our teams to look at all these materials. We did learn that was truly insufficient. We'll talk a little bit later about some things we learned, but we recognize, at least in this year, that it does take multiple times for us to get that, or perhaps we would have been better to allow just longer amount of time in that initial meeting. So that's information that we use to really think forward about what goals we want to invest in, what work we want to do, and then Linda guides the teams through and think about, all right, well, what does it take? What are the resources, financial costs to what that plan might be? So that's the process that we use. And then there's iterations that follow. So that's the launching of this process. We come back for folks and we say, hey, on my part, I say, here's some strategies and processes I recommend you consider based on what I've seen in the data. Have you thought about this? Linda says, hey, I've noticed this in where you was a challenge in our finances last year, or here's opportunities. These are things you might want to consider. And then the teams come through and say, this is what we've noticed and observed. And collaboratively, we help think forward about what we want to work on and how to use the resources we have available to attend to that.
Yeah, one thing I've observed from both of you is more of this sort of telling the story of what the numbers mean and helping folks to sense make around that, which is really important. Linda, give us an example of this process, like a more real or concrete example from within the organization.
Yeah, I think our team I'm really proud of our team through this past year. We've been, New as a nonprofit does have this double bottom line. And so it's not just the margin, the numbers and making sure that we're in the black and not in the red, which would be my purview. But it's also the mission. It's carry on strategy and programmatic functions, like where are we as an organization having impact? And so it's this mission and margin. So our teams have over the past year been having these mission margin meetings that we've had evolved over the course of the year. So I think they came into this budgeting process a little bit prepared, knowing that they have to balance these two things. And they're not separate. They link together. They're like intimately linked together.
Yeah.
And so the example that I can give around learning communities helps us to think about really helps Hamida and Kali as the two people who work leading our learning communities to make these decisions of what we did last year and how that's going to inform what we do next year. Yeah. So one concrete example is we pull evaluation data from our cohorts, participants who have taken part in previous learning communities. And we can see trend data in numbers. For example, if we had a virtual event and we anticipated 100 people would show up and only 3 people show up, that's information, right? So we have information like that on the margin side, and then on the mission side. And then on the margin side, it's the numbers behind, okay, this, the nuts and bolts, like we have an in-person event, we buy food for 10 people, it actually costs this much money. Mm-hmm. And so we can take those two kind of foundational pieces of information on the mission and the margin, and then think about what is it that we want to do next year that will have the impact that we want for our learning communities. And that's information that then Hamida and Kali, like Carrie talked about, then we have a conversation all together and we can sense make, we can talk through how we want to evolve. One of the big examples coming out of the pandemic was all our programming went virtual, and then experimenting with bringing it back in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You all did a stellar job around that. And just for folks who might be newer to new, our learning communities are how we describe our leadership development programs, and they're cohort based, and they bring folks from across sector together to learn across many different subject matters. So thanks, Linda. I would offer that this process had historically been done only by senior leaders, usually the CEO and CFO. When I got selected to be the CEO in 2020, within 2 months, there was a pandemic. We were meeting a lot online and virtually, like so many others. And we were actually in the process of articulating our theory of change, which we'll share in another blog. When I suggested to Carrie that we bring people together in a virtual staff summit actually, we called it a retreat the first year, and we learned not to do that because you don't work at retreats. But what evolved from that, Carrie, was that 3 years ago, we held our first virtual staff summit. And since then, we've held this annual event. Tell us a little bit about what happens there and how does that tie then to the budgeting goal development process?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because there's multiple different objectives for this summit. Like one of the key things is this broad goal of building camaraderie, trust, understanding, because we're still primarily remote working. I mean, we do try to come together, but not the same way that we often did every day, prior to the pandemic. So this is an important place to bring people together and get them to understanding what's happening across the organization. And I can think back to one of our colleagues' feedback that he offered at the end. He's like, it can be isolating working remotely at times. And so this opportunity to come together was a way to really help get an understanding of that bigger picture and to see what part his work plays in this larger organization. So that is like kind of summed up generally what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people to see what they're doing and how it contributes to the larger whole and like get to know people. It's like there's a joy of being in space together and learning.
And I think also though, when you say like the interconnections of our different approaches to our work, so that coming together makes that
yes.
more meaningful and kind of puts some teeth to it.
Yeah. Thank you for fleshing that out. I think so. They could understand how we're working as a whole.
Mm-hmm. It rebuffs that tendency towards like departmental silos that can happen in organizations where it becomes almost like inter-competition, right? Across those budgets.
Yeah, and the traditional way, like even budgets can help do that. This is the budget for this team, this is the budget for that team, and you can see how those can play against each other. And so we're trying to like move beyond that to think about how are we working together. There's a one bottom line for our organization and how we have to work. And our clients are more often now going between our different our different departments, essentially in a good way, that we actually think an investment in folks from one space to another leads to greater impact. So we want us to be able to work together. So that's part of why we want to
like Jean Bell, who was the former CEO at Compass Point, we learned about the profitability impact matrix from Jean. And one of those pieces is to just recognize that some of your programs are going to be more mission focused. They might not be as margin impactful, but they're important, right? And that's true here at New. We have some programs that don't sustain themselves, that need subsidy, and we have some that make money, and we can use those resources when we bridge those programs and those approaches. We can use those resources across the business. Yeah.
So it is. So the crafting of this summit is really thinking about that, having people understand, and it takes time. Like one thing we've learned from previous summits is the importance of investing in spaciousness. Previously we're like, oh, people, let's make sure we get through it. We'll do half days and we'll just get people in, get people out. And what we hear, people are like, oh, it's a lot. It's a lot to process and to be present and to be able to fully engage. People said, slow it down, give us some more breaks, let us have the time to process. And people need different things. So some people needed movement activities. So one of our colleagues led us through some physical movement activities. And some people said, I just want to go for a walk sometime. So some folks could choose to do that. Other people are like, I just need a few minutes in between sessions to be alone, clear my head, not be around people. So we tried to create a structure that supported different ways that people could get the break in the way they needed it, and then be back and be fully present and able to engage. So there was a lot of intentionality and bringing in different facilitators too. Right. Like it's enough for us to speak at people, by having, lots of our different colleagues, some of the people who play traditional leadership roles and others who don't, to kind of up and shine and to guide us through different ways. I think that really was a beautiful part of the summit that people really.
It's how our diversity, equity, inclusion work has evolved as we've understood the role of power, urgency, the way that it can be hoarded, that urgency can actually prioritize outcomes over people or process over people. So that spaciousness you're talking about is really about us trying to embody this idea of distributed leadership, of transparency, of spaciousness and time and depth to value our humanity and the work, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good.
It was a definite, like, there's been a growth of what we've been,
Yeah,
learning. And this particular summit, if going back to it, I think you were asking, is the linkage with the budget and the goals. So we took some time, we started, like, the flow of the summit was really starting looking backwards. And we had each team tell the story of what they had accomplished, how they had proceeded through their goals and lessons learned. And they were very creative. There was, like, props involved and acting, and, like, it was
So much
playful.
fun.
It was
Yeah.
really playful. So it was fun. And so it brought joy, and people all had a role. They each had a voice in that process. And then we walked people through, talking about our values and what we've heard from them, and feedback on our pulse survey, and we check in, thinking about, we learned from our colleague who is guided us through our understanding of conflict resolution. She's, pursuing her studies in that, so she could be a leader and help us to deepen our understanding of how to attend to that and how we each are coming into that space. So we got there, and then the end of the latter part of the summit, so this is a 4-day summit, was to, like, let's look at our budget. Let's go deep. And Linda really guided folks through, this is what this means, and help people. This is, for not everyone, this is unfamiliar. So, like, walking them through what the numbers mean, what the words mean, answering questions, helping them to think about the implications of the choices that we're making. And then we also did the same thing with our budget, our goal development process. And we developed this dashboard and walk people through to understand goals and strategies and how to measure them and why we do that, and how to really think about predicting what we're able to accomplish in the year, and giving space to say we might make some adaptations with our numbers. So Linda and I learned from our colleagues at Zing Train about some tools about open book management, and thinking about, you can plan for things, and then we can adapt our forecasts as the months go on. And I think this was a newer way for us to think about this process and to share it with our colleagues, that ease some stress about, what if I don't have all the answers today? And we help people to be like, well, we're going to work with you. We're going to make some best predictions of what we think is going to happen, both in terms of the budget and in terms of your budget or your goals. So that's what we did. We supported our team and gave them time to work on those goals in the meeting itself, in the summit.
Yeah. Just want to mirror back or kind of summarize that, Carrie. So in late February, early March, you all year long, you're having the mission margin meetings. Late February, early March, you start the start, stop, continue meetings. The start goes into the first blush of the budget. And folks can kind of see, what are the implications of these things you want to start, and the continue things go into that draft budget, right? Because you're saying, we want to continue doing this activity, or purchasing this amount of food, or hiring this person. And the stop as well goes into the budget. You see it as a reduction in expense in those budgets, right? Then when Linda brings that forward, by the time Linda brings it forward in the summit, there's been a few of those budget meetings that you all are talking about with all of the teams, where they're kind of playing around. I think we called it a playground this year, where they're playing around with what ifs, right? If we did this, what's the implication here? So that by the time they get to the summit, it's sort of like, okay, where do we need to adapt and pivot, right? Before, Linda, who's leading this entire budget development process, with not just staff, but with our finance committee and with the board of directors, right? Before Linda in early June begins to construct that final budget, right? So wonderful explanation of the process, and the summit as a way to bring folks around, mission, margin, impact, and how that shows up in the budget based on prior year and what we're futuring or thinking about. Linda, as we prepare to wrap up this recording, what are some lessons you've learned, and what recommendations might you make to folks watching today's video?
Yeah, Thanks for the question. I think the first thing to name is really that money is weird, and it's helpful to just say that up front. Like, we all operate in this system of capitalism. We bring our own biases and our lived experience, and so everyone has their own relationship with money that is weird. It's like this weird taboo topic that we don't talk about. Or we're not as adept at talking about. And so being able to name that and recognize that, I think helps recognize our humanity in this budgeting process.
Mm.
There is this, Carrie mentioned it as well, like a fear of getting it wrong. And so naming that, saying that it's okay to guess at something, and we document our assumptions. And if that assumption shifts throughout the year, you're not going to get penalized for it. It's not going to be like a, hey, you didn't meet your mark. We just reforecast, we reassess what our assumptions are going to be looking forward. So we're also going to try, and this came out of Zing Train's open book management as well, to spend only 20% of our time looking backwards and more 80% of our time focused on future forward. It's also pushing back against the scarcity mindset and scarcity thinking. This idea that permeates nonprofits of, we only have this much money, so we have to cut costs, we have to do this as cheaply as possible, and really wanting to shift more to an abundance mindset, and know that we can, the work that we're doing is important for our community, it's having impact, and we're going to find ways, it's going to cost us much money, and we'll find ways to make it happen. And then balancing mission and margin, which I think has come across as a theme through this whole the conversation that we've been having, and also the conversation that we've been having as an organization. Another thing that I learned is to plan enough time. Carrie also mentioned this. We had initially thought an hour and 15 minutes for this meeting. It'll be great, for the whole team to get their voices in and talk about what they want to start, stop, and continue. And just realizing that right at the hour and 10-minute mark is when people felt comfortable and were getting into the juicy conversations. And so just, forward thinking, blocking off some big chunks of time so that we can deep dive into this. And also balancing that with this idea that not everyone, yes, we want everyone's voices in, but also not everyone needs to know all of the percentage formulas that I'm doing in the background, or all of the in-depth spreadsheet stuff that, really is my gift and is my, job here in the organization. But it's kind of transforming that into the narrative piece and the storytelling piece. And so that was really a lesson learned. I think some of our growth edges are around salary transparency and salary structure. And so we exist in this sort of hierarchical structure. We have these salary bands and more traditional sort of performance review things, and how that butts up against more equitable pay practices that we as an organization are experimenting with. We're learning from other organizations. We're really pushing the status quo. And this continues to be this learning piece for us as an organization. Something I'm really excited about, but something that is new to us. And so I find myself tripping up of but we, this is how it's always been. And then, reminding myself but it doesn't always have to be that way. If the system is broken, let's not keep perpetuating it. And knowing that takes time, and we want to be mindful and intentional about how we're doing that. And then sort of a final piece just around understanding staff time. So knowing that the culture building pieces here at New especially, but I think across all nonprofits, knowing that takes time to work on. Something that I really love that we do here at New is once a month we do our staff dialogues, and we really deep dive into examining some of these structures that we all exist in. But that's an hour every single month out of everyone's day, and that costs money. That's time, and it's administrative time, but it's important time. And so being able to budget for that time, account for it, and then to tell that story of why we are allocating this time, setting aside this time for everyone to work on our culture pieces. Back to you, Yodit.
Yeah, I want to shout out just your leadership around now annualizing salary increases for all staff and the way we apply an equity lens to that, and also our cost of living increases, which we have really been trying to follow national standards and to compensate folks in ways that are equitable and that acknowledge the impacts of the market volatility on them. Wow, this has been good, really good. Thank you. You know, folks, after a few years of more abundant resources coming into the sector, we're already beginning to see contraction, especially in contributed revenue. We're experiencing it. We know many of you are. Our theme for this year's budget was intentional growth as we navigate the impacts of a quote unquote post-pandemic nonprofit sector and funding paradigm. We'll be thinking about you all, and we'll be talking about that. And intentional growth for us really uplifts what Linda said about the balance of mission and margin and being a people-centered organization. So continuing to care for our people through the ebbs and flows of the economy and other dynamics. We certainly hope that this introductory and first of our what I think will be many blogs together, this one on participatory budgeting and goal development process. We hope it was useful for you. You're going to find some resource links below, and you should also feel free to reach out to Carrie or Linda through our website at www.new.org. Carrie, Linda, thank you both, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks.